Hi, Daniel. Welcome to Slasog Leaders and Readers. We connected recently and we did the first book swap of my life. And as you just shared, you took the only photo during your vacation and you reviewed my book. And so I just want to hold up the Digital Phoenix. This arrived in my inbox and I read it through, and this is one of the few books really focused on legacy businesses in traditional sectors. And that's something I really care about, and I think that's underappreciated, and there's too little literature focused on this. And so I was super happy to read your book. And you're a professor at the Politecnico di Milano. Your co-author is Tommaso Buganza. I want to start with a provocative question to really kind of understand what got you focused on legacy businesses and on traditional sectors and why you wrote this book. What's your fundamental disagreement with the status quo? Why do you do what you do?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Ritavan, for having me and for, engaging in a conversation on LinkedIn, for sending your book to us, and for taking your time to read ours. As you said, I am professor at Politecnico di Milano, and I've been writing this book with Tommaso. This is our second book. The first one is titled Platform Thinking, while the Digital Phoenix Effect just came out a few months ago. Your question is actually perfect to tell us something about the environment we are in, meaning that the reason why we are focusing on legacy firms, on established companies, is actually pretty easy if you look at our background. Politecnico di Milano is a multidisciplinary technical university in Italy, which means that in our campus there are courses on engineering, architecture, and design. I am actually an engineering. I've been studying here management engineering. And within our department, our research group used to focus, or traditionally focused, on innovation management. So on how we can help establish organizations in let evolve whatever they do, which can be finding a new innovative strategic direction. It can be finding new ways to deal with their customers. It can be defining an innovation strategy for their products, or can be guiding the innovation within the organization, which means engaging people, finding ways to present the innovation within the company. And this has always been our backbone. The founder of our team actually got close to the design school, and this is probably Politecnico DNA. We have always been pretty close to the industrial environment, which in Italy is definitely more represented by small, medium, and large established organizations rather than startups, even though we have a number of great startups. And the design school is traditionally oriented towards offering possible solutions rather than just studying what is happening out there. In our path, in our research in the world of platforms, even though we started from digital startups, we actually heard the power of our legacy, in a way, the power of our roots. So we soon switched towards legacy companies, trying to understand how what made huge startups like Airbnb or big tech companies that used to be startups like Amazon, Facebook, and all the others can actually be useful for established organization. Our usual audience is usually made of leaders in that type of organization. And being so close to the design school, we also enter within the design research paradigm, trying to offer methods, ways, and tools to help organization dealing with what we are proposing. So we're not really disagreeing with what is out there, but we would like to complement it with a different perspective. Instead of talking about startups, we would like to talk to the leaders of established organization. Instead of stopping at a reading level of what is going out there, we wanted to propose a way to make practical what we learn over the years from a theoretical and scientific perspective.
Yeah, I'm so glad we're speaking because this aligns totally with my values and what I've seen. And it was, I worked across startups and larger established companies. And what happens is either the large companies sort of try to follow big tech playbooks or they follow startup playbooks, both of which are not designed for them from first principles. And so what I was really happy to read in your book is you're not just saying, oh, this worked for startups, why don't you try this? You're saying, let's think from first principles around, where you stand, what you're good at and how you leverage that and how you can win in the market. And so I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I look forward to unpacking this in greater detail. And the other thing that shines through in your book, especially, in the later part, because the first part you explain what platforms are, etc., what people understand correctly, wrongly, etc. And then you go on to say, how do you actually implement this, right? How do you actually apply this to your business? And that is also super important, because otherwise, you're just kind of like a reporter on reality instead of shaping it. And I'm so glad that you do that. Before we really dive into the subject material, I'd be super happy if you could just take a step back and, just connect the dots in your life story. And, what brought you here, was it things you noticed as a child, dinner table conversations, setbacks you had, aha moments, whatever made you who you are in brief, so we get to understand you as a person.
I grew up in Livigno, which is on the border with Switzerland. I grew up in an hotel. My parents used to manage an hotel and a restaurant, so I grew up in a kind of entrepreneurial setting. That even though it's highly unrelated with what I'm doing today, I think it represents quite clearly some of the approaches that we brought within our research, trying to go beyond papers, trying to go beyond the usual academic things, and trying to bring what we are studying and what we are doing out there in a different ways. Beside that, how I end up doing what I'm doing is pretty straightforward. As a management engineer, I met Tommaso in a class on innovation management. It was teaching technological innovation, and they were the early days of mobile apps, new business models, digital data. And I got super interested in this story that he was sharing about Waze and how Waze was a different type of innovation using data in real time to actually influence the behavior of other users. And I asked him if he would have liked to become the supervisor of my master thesis. I actually wrote a thesis that was originally on that case. It later became my first academic article. And at a certain point, reading and wondering, we end up seeing a platform-based mechanism in those apps. The fact that you are gathering data from one set of users to give them a service, and those data can actually be used by someone else outside the organization for a different purpose. I'm talking about Strava. Strava used to, well, they are still doing it, but now they are doing it in a different way. Back in the days, they were gathering data to actually let you know how far you run or you cycled, and to let you know, all the stats. But those data aggregated and obviously anonymized can actually be relevant for municipalities, for example, to decide where to build a new bike lane. For a bunch of years, they've been selling those data. Now they are sharing those data for free. But still, this brought us in the world of platforms to customers linked by cross-site network externalities. And after that, I decided to pursue my PhD on that.
With Tommaso.
Yeah, he used to be my supervisor. And after the PhD that was barely startup driven, we actually said, okay, how can we bring platforms into what we usually do in terms of company engagement, in terms of speaking, in terms of, even the industrial environment that is around us here in Milano, and to a certain extent, probably I could say in Europe. And there the idea of platform thinking came through. With the entrepreneurial route that I was kind of mentioning before. So we founded a conference. We decided to write a book, even though we were not expected to. We created a card set.
Nice.
We did a number of things that were a bit out of the usual things. And we are having a lot of fun with that, trying to have the largest impact we can with our research.
No, and I really like that you going the extra mile, you're writing the book, you're making the card set, you're doing all these things that you wouldn't typically think of doing, but that are so much more impactful because and the community and the conference, and like you get a feeling like you're not on, you're not alone going on some crazy journey. You have that feeling of confidence that there are other people too, and that this is something worth pursuing. So yeah, let's dive straight in. I think what happens very often is a lot of mistakes get made because people sort of follow groupthink, don't think things through in detail, etc. There's a lot of orthodoxy. There's a lot of that's like the challenges that you face not just in legacy businesses but also in startups. Right, very quickly there's a lot of orthodoxy that develops that actually ends up in bad outcomes. And so to start out, right, to avoid these costly groupthink mistakes and to end up going the wrong way, you start your book by explaining what a platform is and how it's come to mean like almost anything to everyone, and how that you need to think a little rigorously about stuff to be able to be successful. So can you unpack, what a platform is, etc., and also then speak about the key mistakes that you've seen people make often, and the lack of nuance or rigor that people end up having, and that ends up costing them money upfront. So what can they do to save money by not making these mistakes?
I must say this is becoming slightly easier than a few years ago, but we definitely spent a lot of years on this issue, not really from a scientific perspective, but dealing with companies, like trying to get people out of the usual misconception that anything that is digital worth to be called a platform. Scientifically speaking, it really depends the discipline you're entering into the discussion from. Like, if you come from information system or computer science, I see why you call platform anything that is digital, because the way in which you code, the way in which you write a digital service is usually modular, and that connects with the idea of product platform back in the 90s that actually resonate with this base upon which you build something else. But that's a product design perspective. We take a business model perspective. From a business model value creation perspective, platform is a different way to create value in comparison to the linear value chain. Like, you take the model that Porter in 1985 described as the model describing all the organization on the planet, that says that value flows linearly, and in any step you add value on top of that. Like, you have suppliers, you buy the raw materials, you work on them, you add value there, you bring them out to the customers. Well, anything that doesn't work like that can be a platform if there are at least two different sets of customers that generate value for each other while generating network effect. I think the easiest way to get it is looking at Airbnb. Like, there is a central organization that is Airbnb that connects hosts and travelers. From the platform perspective, they are offering a service to both of them. Both of them are customers towards the platform. Even though obviously, if you get an Airbnb, the host to you is going to be a supplier, that's for sure. But for Airbnb, that's actually a customer. They offer them insurance, they offer them marketing tools, they offer them insights. Indeed, they actually pay for what they are getting. That is 20% or so of what you are paying them. So a platform is a complex system of value generation where you have two customers, at least two customers, that generate network effects, which means that the bigger the one side of the platform becomes, the more interesting the platform becomes from the other one. Then this is the simple definition, I hope, that is getting together various typologies. There are marketplaces, transactional platforms, there are innovation platforms that are um, technological base upon which you develop something. So you literally foster innovation on top of that, like operating systems. And then there are the orthogonal platforms, which are the one I mentioned with the example of Strava. I don't think it's essential to have all the nuances of the different typologies to actually appreciate the power of platform, which means creating value collaboratively in a structured way.
And with non-linearities, right, that can compound and grow. I think that's what annoyed me operating for a decade, was the obsession with, small steps in automation or optimization of linear processes. And, that's okay, but you're not going to win big time with that, right? You need some kind of non-linearity. You need some kind of positive externality. You need something that can compound. And then, this quick win mindset of, oh, I quickly do something and then, I'm happy. That is only relevant when you have linearity, right? When you have non-linearity, you actually want to play the big game. You want to compound. And so what I really enjoyed about your book is, this is in the context of leverage, right? Which is, identify and capitalize on your unique competitive advantage. And especially for traditional companies, right? And in traditional sectors, you have physical assets, you have kind of legacy customer demand, right? And you have, let me use the 4 keywords that you use, right? So it was relationships, physical assets, know-how, and data, and all these things are already there. And so, you can, as a legacy business in the traditional sector, you can already play to those strengths instead of starting from zero like a startup would. So yeah, what would you tell businesses who want to build a platform? How would you ask them to think about these, and how can they leverage their unique unfair advantage to win?
I will give you an answer in 2 steps. I'd like to tell you how we got there, and then I would like to tell you how I would actually answer, well, what I would actually tell a manager regarding your question. We got there observing startups. I was referring to Airbnb, so we can stay there. That is easier. But the same is true for Uber. It's true for Facebook. It's true for Booking.com, even for Spotify and many others. Airbnb at a certain point decided to enlarge its business by getting on board experienced providers. So instead of getting you access just to the place where you're going to stay, they also help you in framing, designing, deciding what you're going to do during your experience. And well, when it happened, it was more or less the same period in which Uber created Uber Eats. And Tommaso and I, with few colleagues, wrote a paper that is titled Idle Asset Hunter. The platforms are able to see an asset that is idle, which means that exists, that it's there, that probably it's even used, but it's not fully used. If Uber and Airbnb started off finding idle assets on the market and exploiting them through a platform, which means that you have a spare room and I can use it when I'm visiting your city, or you have spare time and a car, you can actually use that time to become taxi-like driver and going around monetize. Big platforms tend to do this mechanism over and over again using the asset that they already onboarded. Creating Airbnb experience means creating a new platform going towards the same customer side, which means that creating that platform is extremely easier than the other one because you already have half of the community on board. The same happened for Uber, even in a smarter way, because they already have on board the driver and the rider. They transform the rider into an end user and they realize they might be hungry as well. And so they welcome on board restaurants that were actually served, and that's still the case in the States, by the drivers themselves. Here in Europe, we saw bikers usually going around, while in the States, they are actually the same drivers that they might pick you up. They also pick pizzas up. That's idle asset hunting. Realizing that the asset that you have there available can actually be used in a different way. And then the movement towards the established organization is almost seamless because Airbnb and Uber, in a way, went on the market looking for those idle assets because they didn't have anything else. Because getting your room instead of building a building, as a Hilton did, is much more, it's not simple. It's definitely less expensive. An established organization is already in the situation of Uber and Airbnb when they create Airbnb experiences and Uber movement. They already have those assets upon which they can build through platform thinking. This is the first part of the answer. So how we got to platform thinking for established companies. But we realized something, that telling this story is compelling from an academic perspective, can be, I hope, compelling for those interested in innovation, because I'm actually telling you, you have something that can be used in a more efficient, in a more effective way. But we realized that is not what the vast majority of managers are actually interested in. And that's where the new book comes in. We decided to frame the usage of platform thinking not as an opportunity, not as something that you could do to better use what you have, but it's something that you could use relying on the idle asset that we mentioned, relationship, data, physical assets, and knowledge, to solve issues. Platforms can actually generate the possibility to reduce the inefficiencies in a process, can actually allow companies to open up to competencies, skills, knowledge that are not owned by the company themselves. Allow anyone to get rid of innovation bottlenecks, or to use data in this ecosystemic perspective, getting together different type of stakeholders. So we thought about giving to the managers two answers. That's actually the beginning of the process you were mentioning. Either you want to exploit an opportunity, so you start from the idle asset and you try to find different usages, or you let them start from the problems they feel, or potentially the problems they feel the closest.
Yeah, no, I think I'm glad you took that step too, because I think very often people would just stop once, before taking this final step. And that really shines through your book. So now that people have, let's say a business leader is listening to this conversation and they have kind of understood how they can leverage their idle assets and their other legacy advantages to build out a platform business takes time, right? This is not a, 1 week, 1 quarter, or, like a quick thing. It's something that you have to think through and build towards, and that requires alignment. And so my question to you is, how should business leaders and investors ensure that they have alignment across their organizations when working and building a platform, right? And what are wrong ways or wrong metrics that you have seen legacy business leaders stumble into, right? So, so just to kind of concretize it, I've seen a lot of people, when they're trying to build data-driven solutions, think about EBITDA, where EBITDA is an industrial metric. It's, you need a forward-looking metric, etc. So in that context, how should, what metrics, what way of thinking of quantifying value delivered should business leaders and investors keep in mind?
I totally agree with your point. And actually, having people looking for classic metrics in platforms is probably the greatest pitfall that led many projects to failure. On paper, developing a platform solution might even be cheaper than going for the same results gathered through a linear approach. But it doesn't mean that that's simple. And for sure, you cannot look for the same type of result. Let's go on Airbnb and Hilton. You don't need asset money that you would need to build an hotel in the first place. To have Airbnb as we know it today, you need much more money than that. But to start it off, you virtually need anything. It allows you to start almost from nothing, while the same thing cannot be done in a linear way. If you want to build your hotel, you may not start with a 200 rooms hotel, but even if you start with a 10 rooms hotel, you need a certain important investment. With Airbnb, they actually start with nothing. And that's one of the beauty of the platform. But if we go at time one from time zero, we realize the other difference. Once you got your budget and you built your hotel, you start getting, I cannot say real money, but concrete money in day one. Because as soon as you open the hotel and you start having your reservation, you are going to have a number of people coming in. And with a percentage that can be more or less high, you start building up profits. At the same time, on Airbnb, you are getting little fees at the beginning that does not pile up as quick as they could in a linear way. And we are actually talking about an example that is relatively interesting from a profitability perspective, because Airbnb tends to have a transaction fee that is around 20%. If you go on Uber and the transaction value is relatively high, if you go on Uber, that number is so little that it will require so much time to actually get to a result. Because the profitability of the platforms comes usually from the scale. So you need time to reach that scale. And what Uber and Airbnb taught us, thinking about what you said before, is that they needed to evolve continuously. So you need to bring next to that little fee something else, another fee, another revenue source, and that requires agility. So platform projects require a clear vision that goes towards a long-term strategy based on agile principles in execution. So the metrics are not that difficult to find. Usually you talked about transacted volume, you talk about number of users on both sides. In certain platforms, you can talk about recurring customers. On BlaBlaCar is super relevant that you don't just use it once, but you go there, because otherwise you need to continuously build the platform. That is not that interesting on a Spotify, where the subscription makes you by default a recurring customer. But given their business model, is super interesting how much a heavy user you are there. Because the more you are on the platform, the more you are expensive towards the platform. So the single metrics actually depends a bit on the specific model type. But they are not difficult to get. What is difficult to get is the different type of mindset that you should have towards that. We are talking about medium-term goals that are made usually of a huge sum of little pieces that will probably change over time quite consistently. And that's where Agile comes in. And if you think about many platforms, they are actually pretty different from how they got into the market. That's pretty normal in the platform world.
Yeah, and I think what you say is so important, because when you look at it from a financial perspective, if you take the industrial lens, right, with constant replication and personalization costs, etc., and you look at a platform, it looks like a horrible investment, right? It looks like something that's not fun because, like you said, it's a whole bunch of tiny transactions. But if you see it on a longer time frame and you see it with a non-industrial lens, right, one that understands the digital paradigm's kind of zero marginal, cost of replication, then suddenly you realize, wow, okay, this is a compounding machine with non-linearities. And
Yeah,
when you,
sorry, if I can jump in
of
on
course,
this, I think that from a legacy firm perspective, this is even more interesting, because in many cases, the real benefit is not the direct revenue, but is the missed cost that you are generating. Because for legacy firms, in many cases, creating a platform means entering into market niche that are taken by competitors, usually smaller, usually startups, usually coming from different countries, that would probably eat your market share. And even though you are having a little revenue out of that, the real value lies in the fact that you are actually keeping the customer with you, offering something new that otherwise you wouldn't.
100%.
This is not true for startups, but in legacy firms, an important metric that is difficult to make object, but that should be considered is the missed cost that you are
The
actually
opportunity
getting.
costs,
The opportunity cost, yeah.
which actually, unfortunately, a lot of people don't think about in legacy businesses. But that's the real cost, because the other costs are operational, right? That's something you can manage, you can optimize. Like I say, sometimes, in the airline business is barely profitable, if profitable at all. And yes, you can try to optimize something in your operations here and there and try to squeeze out 0.01, percent of EBIT, but that's not where you're winning, right? They're winning somewhere else. They're winning in their loyalty program, etc., because that's the cash cow. This also kind of reminded me of two things that are, that just came to mind based on what you said. Is one where as a legacy business, like a lot of, I think Clayton, like along with platforms, I think Clayton Christensen's word disruptive innovation got misused, like this idea of disruption got misused. Disruption is not anything that's new and that is disruptive, that changes something. Disruption, according to Christensen, is when a competitor starts with a worse product, right, qualitatively, and then kind of works their way up. But most disruption in the common parlance, right, when suddenly something gets captured, is actually when a new player comes in and captures demand, right, what you just said. And so that is what a lot of people call disruption, when it's not actually the way disruption is defined in the academic literature. That is more like blitzscaling, where you actually come in and capture demand. And what you said here was so important, because as a legacy business, you have your linear business, you have your customers, but you're playing the linear game. If you add a layer of non-linearity, right, to your offering to your customers, you are essentially counter-positioning and allowing yourself to retain the opportunity costs of the demand that you are not yet servicing, right? So you start servicing that demand, and you have a much stronger moat and also a new growth lever as a business. And I think that is so often underappreciated. And for me, what comes to mind is, Walmart essentially counter positioning Amazon and saying, yes, we have a physical store footprint, and if you look at it in a linear way, that's not a great thing. But now we can counterposition to you because we understand our customers not just online, because we have, the online purchase part, but we understand them in store. And now if you're a supplier, suddenly you get information that is so much more valuable that a pure play digital player just cannot give you.
I love your presentation of the disruptive innovation. That's actually a framework I love. There was this amazing HBR article from 2015 in which Clayton Christensen is actually saying, what is disruptive innovation 20 years after its original book? Because the vast majority of people actually misunderstood it. And I think there are huge connection points between what we are saying and disruptive innovation. Because platform is kind of moving, not really the competition, but the focus on something slightly different for the company. And that's probably a bet. You're not sure it will disrupt, as Christensen showed, but that's where you start from. And and I think it's very interesting what you were saying on Walmart and Amazon, also for another perspective. Because doing a platform, developing a platform from a legacy company perspective has a lot of cons. Because you have an organizational culture that can go against what you're trying to do, because you have a legacy business that many managers will try to protect no matter what, because you will have fear within the company of cannibalizing what you are doing, of changing the DNA of what you are doing. But there are also enormous pros in doing a platform from that perspective. And the main one is that when a large organization move, it's much easier in a way to get that project, that idea, that platform on the market. We cannot compare Amazon and Walmart today, but if Walmart had the same idea Bezos had in the 90s, the path to get Amazon to what became would have been for sure smaller and shorter. And today we have the power to understand the dynamics of the last 30 years and to learn from the path that made Amazon and all the other usual names what they are. But unfortunately, we still lack the awareness on the need to learn from these guys, because they are not strange, they are not hippie, they are just leveraging on a different value creation model that can fit potentially anywhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I think now you see Walmart really kind of striking back with Seth Dallaire, right, who is ex Amazon, who is, ex Instacart. And He's essentially taking the goods flowing, where you're taking physical goods from suppliers in sort of the traditional retail model and selling them to customers. But what Walmart is sitting on is in-store shopping behavior and data. And now they're selling it back to their suppliers. So, even within your linear model, you can reverse the flow because data flows opposite to the industrial goods. And now your suppliers turn into customers. And so, you have Walmart data ventures, et cetera. And so I think these are the opportunities. What he just said around, these guys are not hipsters, right? They're extremely sharp. And you just have to read Bezos's letters, early letters, when the stock price tanks, and the way he reacts. And one thing that's been sort of really, like, you speak to any ex-Amazonians and how they go about thinking and executing, is modularizing complexity. So I think AWS, for example, scaled outside and was initially built for internal use at Amazon to serve their in their internal problems, but then ended up scaling around the world. And one way they managed that very early on was to modularize complexity, right? To ensure that things remained as simple as possible. And this is an executive priority because, a lot of people say, oh, but complexity is a bad thing, without understanding how complexity is born. No one wakes up in the morning and says, let me increase complexity in the business. The way complexity is born is through problem solving. Something breaks, someone fixes it, and so you put a lot of duct tape, right? You kind of try to, do you do the right thing actually? So the error correcting mechanism of problem solving is what increases complexity. And so it has to be an executive priority, right? From the top down, to ensure there's simplification. And I also heard this from Mark Hyink, right? Who's written a seminal book on ASML, the European leader in lithography machines. And Martin van der Brink, who was, the former chief technical officer, he would ensure in every meeting, he would look at whatever was presented and he would say, how do we make this simpler? Because our machine is already very complex. And so coming to this idea of simplify, and you've worked with a whole load of legacy businesses and sort of seen this in action. Where do you see people increasing, sort of not keeping this complexity under control, letting the costs of complexity grow, and then, eventually leading to collapse? And how should people think about building platforms while keeping things simple, right? While not allowing complexity to explode? Because I think that's a big risk when legacy businesses try to do this.
Yeah, I would say this is a human problem because we tend to pile up ideas and make things complex a bit by nature. And this is also kind of a legacy in legacy firms. That's the stage gate approach. Before you start a project, you need to see the whole picture and then breaking it down by from the very beginning so that you can do the right thing first. In platforms, that doesn't work. In platforms, an agile approach is what is needed, a flexible mindset. Let me say, to stay to the entrepreneurial world, what Eric Rice said with his startup way, the legacy version of his lean startup approach. In our process, we actually allow people to create very complex ideas platforms. If you look at Amazon today, you have sellers and merchants, you have the production studios, the movie production studios on Prime Video that are actually putting their content there, authors, publishers, and authors on Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, on the Kindle platform at large. There are the workers of Mechanical Turks. There are even the gamers of Twitch since they decided to buy it. But this took 30 years. And what I believe is that when you are trying to design your platform, you can have a vision that allow you to think in a complexity that is comparable to what I just described. That you have three different set of users on the demand side and 7 different types of supply side users. You can think about that, but that's not how you can start. You need to start simpler. You need to start from what Marshall and Geoff call the core interaction that your platform is going to enable. In our words, we tend to ask, what's the value proposition that your platform is offering? Uber says, we set the world in motion. Airbnb says, belong anywhere. It's important to have it there, but your job at the beginning is understanding what it means. for all your customers is making sure that you're answering to real needs for all the types of customers that you had. And that's where the platform game become difficult, because if marketing books tell us that customer centricity is important, I agree in the platform world, only if you are 100% aware that you have multiple sets of customers. The vast majority of platforms fail because they are too customer obsessed only by one type of customer. In my opinion, the way to keep this manageable is the necessity to have a clear vision that then translate into strong, pure value proposition design, data-driven, fact-based, dealing with the potential customers and actually solving their needs, without forgetting that a platform have more than one set of customers.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And also when you have that foundation, right, then something I see very few companies thinking about rigorously and spending time on is cultivating an empirically valid worldview, meaning something that's founded in facts, that's measurable, etc., not not a graph you draw in your corner on paper, and sort of improving decision making, right, based on that. And like you said, a platform is not a static sort of build once and sell kind of product, right, like a typical industrial product would be. And so it requires a different way of operating and building. It requires a mindset of continuous and deliberate learning, adaptation, and optimization. Sort of, as I argue, to win in the traditional industrial value creation paradigm, it was all about scale. The more you produce, you can have more buffer to push prices down. And so, you can win in the market. In the digital value creation paradigm, it was about speed, right? How fast can you build it? Because the marginal cost of replication is zero. And so if someone builds faster, you're screwed. And so you want to build as fast as possible. And I feel that, with the data-driven paradigm, where you have algorithms, etc., it's about adaptability. Scale and speed are good, but it's about, can you change based on how the world is changing, right? And how smart are your decisions? And in that context, in what ways have you seen people optimize either the right way or the wrong way, right? What should business leaders who want to win with platforms keep in mind? What are your learnings?
I think the most successful stories I've seen have two characteristics. The first one is leadership resilience, which means that the person that is leading this project needs to lead it no matter what, being ready to go through harsh times and becoming a kind of evangelist of this type of project. You are asking your organization to believe in something that is structurally built differently from your usual organization. This is clear in the words of Bettina Rothermund, of Stefano Fasani, of Pierre Durostu, the three platform thinkers that we interviewed for the opening stories of the book on Siemens, AXA, and Eni. They actually were the heart of the project. They were not by themselves, obviously, they have a team, but in different ways, they always shared with us their need to constantly help people within the organization understanding what these platforms are doing, why they exist, what the strategic goal, and why that's good for the organization and that's not a threat. The second is agility. Platforms start with a vision, must evolve to become successful platforms, but StageGate is not there for platforms. You need to adapt to the reaction, to adapt to a context that is constantly evolving. And that requires a constant monitoring of what is going on, exactly as it happened in Agile. You stop monitoring because you are always monitoring. That's how it works.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the whole point of doing all of this is to grow, right? I think a lot, what happens legacy businesses tend to just focus on their existing legacy businesses and don't realize the infinite opportunities out there, right? Have an abundance mindset. So not just look at your EBIT margin and be like, okay, that's the capital I have, that's the capital I can allocate and deploy to grow. But just realize there is so much latent demand out there. And with essentially zero replication costs, right, in the digital paradigm, and with zero personalization or decision making costs in the data driven paradigm, or the, want to call it AI, whatever, right? But like, what happens there is new opportunities emerge, right? And you need to be open to consider new groups of people as potential customers. And so in that context, what would you like to share, and how should legacy business leaders think bigger?
Thanks for the question, because I was actually asking to go in this direction, because I think we talked about many. I like what we are talking about, but I haven't shared almost any concrete example. And I would like to briefly bring you through the first part of the book. The book is divided in three parts. The first one, we decided to focus on only three stories that are actually taken in a quite important storytelling way. One is Siemens, one is the AXA, and the other one is Eni. Siemens developed Siemens Accelerator, which is, to make it very simple in my words, they open up their hardware, transforming it into an innovation platform, which means that their hardware, exactly as the iPhone, is now available to other companies to let them develop softwares on top of that is then changed on a marketplace they created, where there are also other services coming from other players. And this helped Siemens in moving from an hardware company to a digital company that is not just up to a modern company, let me say, that is not just doing hardware or software, but is doing both. It was a way to answer to a need of digital transformation. And in a way, Siemens can be a flagship case of the platform thinking revolution, because you have an established company using platforms to develop a new business model. But in the first part of the book, we bring in two other cases. AXA developed AXA Digital Commercial Platform. That is a B2B platforms that allow their the commercial customers, so their business customers, to get in touch with data providers, service providers related to risk mitigation. So it's not just a matter of insurance, it's a matter of dealing with the risk in another way. This is working on the main primary activity of AXA. It's looking to their own customer to expand what they are doing, involving in the same field, involving someone else. This is almost product innovation. This is not changing the overall business model. It's not opening up to whatever. It's a way to see what you are doing in a different way. And then we have Eni. Eni created a platform that support companies, actually original Eni's suppliers, in their sustainable transformation, enabling them to get in touch with certification providers, trainers, consultants, and so on and so forth. Then they were bright enough, they were actually super smart in deciding to offer this platform to other companies. So it's open to Autostrade per l'Italia, Snam, many other Italian companies that brought their suppliers in. But what I find super interesting is that this platform was actually there to help on a support process, to help the procurement department. It's totally far from the business model. In this way, platform become a way to foster innovation. So if I can slightly twist your question, my point is not using platforms because they are cool. It makes sense. It's cool. I like it. That's a strategy. That might be a way to foster innovation. But there is something more. Platform is a way to create and manage value that can be more effective and more efficient in comparison to the linear value chain. So why don't you think about solving your problems with a platform? That's our challenge. And that's where the second part of the book comes in. Bringing in 800 initiatives, 140 real cases of platforms, because all the others, I'm sorry to say, but they were just digital services, so they had not the characteristics of platforms, and we clustered them around 5 different main problems that companies can solve, which means going through efficiency, customer demand that is evolving, innovation bottlenecks, data that you need or data that you have that you want to get or use. And we tell those stories through other cases, shorter, from Chipotle to Royal Caribbean to Kroger and many Caterpillar and many others. And then we get to the process. But what I really like to highlight is that it's not a strategy book. This is an innovation book. We are offering executives different way to think about how to solve their problems in a new way within the organization.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, I think I can't think of a better way to wrap up. So yeah, the book is The Digital Phoenix Effect. Yeah, make sure you grab a copy. I have markers everywhere noted down. There's a lot of food for thought, and I really enjoyed the book, Daniel, and you and Tomas have done a fantastic job, and I'm so glad we could record this and have this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on /Leaders and Readers.
Thank you very much for having us. It was a pleasure.